time for World Politics, and I've got Rick Rosner with me, and we'll see if anybody else joins this fun party. And all along those lines, I get them invitations, and I see Sasha Starr has joined us as well. But one of the things that I saw in the news is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is, she's always up to something or another in her efforts to vacate the senator, Mr. Johnson, and everything, is saying that the Democrats want Donald Trump dead. So that is what she has said. And she has said that that is the reason that they need to vacate Mr. Johnson, even though a number of people, including, I believe, Sasha, has said that Johnson is an ally of Mr. Trump and all along those lines. I'm going to bring them in, not that much of a monologue on this particular day, but I might get to some other political things and all along those lines. But Rick, what do you think of this notion? Because
first off, Mark,
I was here to my other work job and everything, and I heard
your voice is a little garbled. It's hard to hear what you're saying. I don't know what's happening there.
Okay, well, I'll see if I can adjust it all along those lines. Sometimes it is fascinating what goes on in the world, so we'll see if we can get rid of some of the garbled sounds. It might be the background noise in the background. Let's see if that's better.
Yeah, that is better. Thank you.
Okay, so we got rid of some of the background noise in the background and all along those lines. But yeah, I was saying that I was reading the news as I was coming here, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying that the Democrats want Donald Trump dead, and that's part of the reason that she was trying to vacate Senator Johnson's position and all along those lines. So apparently she's up to her usual craziness and all along those lines. So I just wonder what you and Sasha think of this notion of her trying to vacate his seat. They had some troubles before and everything, but now she is saying that the Democrats, I guess, have a hit out on Trump. And I also saw that Trump was in the news for something that you sometimes, and I've been guilty of it because I've mentioned that I saw a Playboy special, but apparently Trump got in trouble because he held up a copy of Playboy magazine. And
let me talk about wishing Trump ill. When a liberal is obsessed with Trump, conservatives say he has TDS, which is Trump derangement syndrome, also known as Orange Man Bad. And I admit I've got a full-blown case of TDS. I think about Trump a lot. And I do not wish him dead. If he were to die between now and the election, might replace him with somebody electable, somebody competent, somebody who could talk to all of the voters instead of what Trump does, which is just talk to his extremist base. So no, I don't want him dead. I was doing some math yesterday. I want him, I think he's having trouble putting on his makeup lately. He just kind of gets it on the front of his face. And then if they photograph him from the side, you can see where the orange ends and the flesh tone begins. But does this make him totally crazy? No, I think he is only 25% of the way on the way to being so crazy and incompetent that the Republicans have to replace him. And I'm thinking he maybe gets 2% more crazy every week. So maybe by the convention, he'll be, 40% of the way to being too crazy for the Republic. But so I want that. I want him to just keep getting more and more crazy and scaring away more and more reasonable voters until, by November, he's fully just insane. But no, I don't want him dead.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people want him dead that I'm aware of and everything. But Sasha, what do you think about this notion of him holding up a copy of Playboy magazine? Apparently that was this past weekend at the LIV golf tournament. I also heard that one of his reporters, who is one of the co-owners of the New York Jets, was talking about how he's a wonderful guy and that he is misunderstood and has a wonderful sense of humor, and that people are not necessarily understanding him in the way that they should understand him. And that was one of the owners, who I believe was a ambassador to one of the countries. It might have been Sweden or Switzerland, but he is also the owner of the New York Jets. So I just wanted your take on this idea of some of his supporters, including this owner of a American football, because I know there's a difference between American football and what many people in the country and the world call football, which is what we call soccer and everything. But definitely, I was wondering your take on some of his supporters, including some high-profile supporters, as well as this notion of his holding up a copy of Playboy magazine. So I guess he's trying to prove that he is a normal, red-blooded American male.
I think that Playboy is actually a high-quality publication. And there are a lot of very interesting articles about sciences and sport and the performers of different kinds. I remember many, many years ago, I read a very interesting interview with Steve Martin, and it was published in Playboy magazine, nowhere else but Playboy. So if he loves to read Playboy magazine, I don't see anything wrong with that. And good luck to him. And maybe what else I can comment on?
Well, but speaking of that, Sasha,
Trump was on the cover of Playboy magazine in 1990. I don't know if he was holding up that issue or a more recent issue.
I think it's a more recent issue, but I'm not sure either, and all along those lines. But there is a person that I don't know if she's been in Playboy. I'm sure she has been and everything, but apparently he is in deep legal troubles because of his situation where he allegedly paid off Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about their alleged affair prior to the 2016 election. And for her part, she's recently released a documentary called Stormy, and apparently she's not going down without a fight and hope. So I just wondered our thoughts about how much damage is this Stormy Daniels affair going to do to his candidacy.
My wife and I watched the Stormy documentary, and that whole thing wrecked her life. Her marriage fell apart. She was, this covered her for about a year, and she's aged, a lot. She was made fairly miserable by the whole thing, and she didn't get rich off of it. And, it was the harassment from Trump's followers, and, she didn't deserve all that. All she did was get kind of bullied into having very brief sex with a man. And
3 seconds, actually.
Yeah, Stormy Daniels says it was over in seconds. And he was holding out, he tried to put her on The Apprentice. And I think he would have followed through with that, except that NBC said, no, we can't put a porn star on your show, which doesn't seem fair. She comes across as very competent and, not stupid. She went into porn because it was she grew up poor in some podunk town, and it was a ticket out of there, and she went from being a porn performer to being a porn director, and wants to direct horror movies. And you can move from, it's tough, but you get skills in porn that translate into other entertainment jobs if you can overcome the stigma. The first movie script, the only movie script my writing partner and I wrote was a porno. So,
speaking of stigmas and everything, there was another young lady that had a stigma of being connected to a presidential candidate. This particular presidential candidate did not win. I remember the scandal when it took place, and all along those lines. And that is Gary Hart and Donna Rice. And apparently, Donna Rice is back in the news because she is very much a advocate for there being safety on the internet. She's even formed a group, and all along those lines, that is in that space, and they are trying to find ways to make the internet safer. And definitely that is something that she went through. So she was the Stormy Daniels before Stormy Daniels, and all along those lines. I just wondering your take on Donna Rice, because like I said, she is the president and CEO of Enough is Enough, an internationally known internet safety expert. And of course, she's won some Emmys herself as well. But she's apparently got this organization that is trying to make the internet safer for children and families. And they've been doing that apparently since 1994. But what's your take on Donna Rice?
She wasn't exactly the Stormy Daniels of the time. She was a woman who was having an affair with a married candidate. And in 1987, pictures of her sitting on candidate Gary Hart's lap on a little yacht called the Monkey Business came out. And that marked one of the first times when the American press decided it was okay to cover candidates philandering. In the 60s, in the 1940s, FDR had a mistress. JFK, as we now know, and his brother RFK, banged a ton of different women, and the press knew about it, but they decided it was traditional, that it was off limits. In 1987, everything changed, and it took down Gary Hart.
I remember I was working at a newspaper at that particular time, and I remember covering his campaign, and then shortly thereafter learning about this takedown event and all in that space. So I definitely just remember him coming to, I believe it was here in North Carolina, to a campaign stop, and then shortly thereafter, I think I might have even reached out to some of his campaign aides who I've totally lost touch with that were part of that campaign to see their reaction. But yeah, it definitely took him down and all along those lines. There's been a lot of talk about this age gap that is existing and the partisan gap and how it might center heavily on age. So I know that you sometimes, Rick, follow things around polls and things around those lines, but definitely they're saying that racial identification also overlaps with age, and younger Americans are falling into some of this age gap conversation, as well as it plays into politics. Because one of the things they're saying is that apparently there's an article in Axios that says that America isn't as divided as it is made out to be. So yes, there are deep divisions that exist on some topics, but they're saying that almost every topic of monthly outrage is a fringe view, example amplified by the loudest voices on social media and politicians driving it. So example, they said most Christians aren't white Christian nationalists who see Donald Trump as a godlike figure. Most are ignoring politics and wrestling with their faith. And no, most college professors aren't trying to silence conservatives or turn kids into liberal activists. And most are teaching math, physics, or biology, or in the case of some of the schools around here, creative arts and some of the things around those lines. And they also said, you'll be glad to know this, Sasha, that most kids don't hate Israel and run around chanting from the river to the sea. Most campuses, most of this time, students are doing what students have always done, which is probably getting drunk and maybe in some cases doing their homework and all along those lines. So they were saying that a lot of these things are driven by the narrative of the extremes, because they said also most Republicans don't want to ban all abortions started at conception. No, most Democrats don't want to allow them until birth either. And no, most immigrants aren't illegally rushing to vote and commit crimes. Actual data shows both rarely happen even amid a genuine crisis at the border. So what is our thoughts about this notion that a lot of this is political posturing?
It's true. It's in the 1960s, Nixon called it the silent majority, that most people just quietly, actually supported Nixon. But even he was fooled by, the loud, more extreme voices. He didn't have to do Watergate. Watergate was about breaking into, the DNC, Democratic National Headquarters, or Nixon was trying to get dirt on his Democratic opponents, and there was no need. Nixon in the 72 election, I think, carried 49 states. He didn't need to engage in dirty tricks, but he must have thought he needed to. And so he authorized these break-ins, which eventually led to him having to leave office. It's long been that, the craziest voices are the loudest. And it's even more true now because social media gives everybody a megaphone.
And speaking of people with a megaphone, apparently a major celebrity has said that he is not going to back a candidate, even though he did back Biden last time. But Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is keeping his name off the ballot slip and his lips sealed about his 2024 presidential vote. But in an interview with Fox and Friends, the wrestler and actor reflected on his 2020 endorsement of President Joe Biden. And he said, what that caused back then was something that cheers me up in my guts back then and now, which is division. Johnson added it's something he won't do this election cycle. So he's saying that he's not going to come out with an endorsement. He says the takeaway after that, after months and months and months, is I started to realize oh man, that caused an incredible amount of division in our country. The Black Adam Star said, I won't do that because my goal is to bring our country together. I believe that in my DNA. So in the spirit of that, there's going to be no endorsement. So he's not going to endorse anybody. but definitely it looks like, despite there being those two candidates and the third party candidates, because there are three of those out there: Robert Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, and Jill Stein. It doesn't look like he's going to back anybody and is going to just do his vote. He did bemoan about this notion of woke culture and cancel culture, because he's saying that really bugs him. And as Jacoby was saying yesterday, I'm trying to figure out if many people even know what woke means and all along those lines. But what's our thoughts about Mr. The Rock backing off of endorsing anybody and him bemoaning the notion of woke society and woke culture?
Sasha hasn't said anything in a while.
Yeah.
You're spending so much time talking about the criminal Trump and some other third-party candidates. You're not talking about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is now the not only a favorite to win this election, but he's creating the economy. If the tomorrow's numbers on CPC and on Thursday, if these numbers will be good and the interest rates indeed, say June, will start going down, then you will have the best economy of all times in the United States. There never been a better. And all this garbage that I see here on our programs that people are screaming, oh, they're paying so much for gas, oh, they're paying so much for this or that. But Biden is jacking up prices for this. This is a natural economic process where the inflation was much more horrendous since even a year, 2 years before. Now, even 2 years ago, I remember, yes, gas was approaching $5 per gallon, but it's no longer the case by far. And in the next, I would say 2-3 months, you will see all those prices will go down, if not earlier. And then we have the strongest economy. And then Trump, what he has to offer. The third party candidates, it's all garbage, complete. There's no point even to discuss the virtues of all these people. Leave them alone, let them read Playboy or do whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter. What Biden does, that's what matters.
Well, there's some bad timing out of Arizona. Arizona just passed a law outlawing all abortion with no exceptions for rape or incest, based on a 160-year-old law from 40 years before Arizona was even a state. And
1864, right?
What?
1864, I believe, was when that law came into effect.
1864 law, yes. Arizona wasn't a state until, I don't know, like the 20th century, like 1902 or something. And, terrible timing for Republicans, because more than half of all voters are women. And, women are the ones who can get pregnant.
Speaking of terrible timing, and this comes back to Biden, and I definitely think that he is a strong candidate and all along those lines. But I did want to ask both you and Sasha, are we at all worried about the fact that Biden may miss a whole state? Because apparently President Biden's name may not appear on another state's general election ballot in November, after Alabama's chief election officials warned Democrats about missing a key deadline in that state's election process. On a letter sent
Alabama? I thought it was a different state, not. But I mean, they can't keep the president who's running off the ballot. They'll figure something out.
I hope so, but they sent a letter sent today, which would have been earlier today and everything. Officials of both the Alabama Democratic Party and the Democratic National Committee, Alabama Secretary of State Wes Allen, a Republican, said the Democrats' national convention is scheduled to occur past the deadline for certifying a presidential candidate in Alabama. So apparently they were supposed to move the convention up.
Even if they do, that's no big deal, because there's no way in a million years that Trump can win Alabama. Alabama is one of the reddest states. So, it doesn't, it would be crazy if they kept him off the ballot, but it wouldn't really affect the outcome of the election.
Yeah, I hope so, because they had,
it's still right at the end.
Yeah, because there's two states that are doing it. Apparently, there's also the Ohio Secretary of State, Frank LaRue.
And that's a big deal, because Ohio's a swing state. But they'll figure out. They may not be able to fix Alabama. Nobody's been able to fix Alabama since the Civil War, but they'll fix Ohio.
they'll figure out a way to fix Ohio and all along those lines. So maybe that'll be the case. And even to Sasha's point, apparently there are some people that saying that Biden is building a whole whale of a campaign. Trump at this point seems to be playing catch up because apparently Biden is flush with cash and opening campaign offices across the country, but has struggled to overcome Trump and his more meager campaign in the polls. So coming back to one of Rick's favorite topics, the polls, which we know they oftentimes are very wrong, but he's been scooping up record-making donations and plowing the money into an expanding campaign operations that appear to surpass.
All right, let me give my little speech about the polls. We were talking about the craziest voices, and over the past 10 years, the crazy voices have been seeping into the polls because 40, 30 years ago, one person in three, you call them up on your regular home phone and you say, do you want to take a survey? And you're excited to do that. It's like participating. And now nobody has a home phone. And one person in 500, if you call them on a cell phone, says yes. Everybody else is like, no, I don't have time for this. And when only one person in 500 says yes, that one person in 500 might be a lunatic. And even just 2% lunatics in a survey can skew the results by 4% and make Trump look like he's leading when he's maybe not.
Yeah, and along those same lines and everything, because we have talked on this show and other shows about the amount of money that these candidates are getting. Apparently, at the end of February, Biden had $71 million. Trump has got some money. I think it's about half of that amount and everything. But the question that people are asking, I'd love to hear Sasha's thoughts about this, is how much of that money that people are sending to Trump is actually going to Trump and how much of it is going to his legal fees? Because that's
Trump has spent $100 million on lawyers in roughly the past year, which just seems, I don't know, that I should Google that because that just seems crazy, but that's the number that comes to mind.
But until the trial starts, then you will see really how much he will have to spend, because trial is probably the most expensive thing when you're paying legal fees. Okay, so you're paying a little bit here, a little bit there, a couple of $1,000 for advice, but then trial. That's where you spend $5,000-$10,000 a day easily.
So I was mistaken. It wasn't in a year. Since he left office, he's spent $100 million on lawyers.
Oh, it's going to be much, much higher than that once trials start.
No doubt about that and everything. How much are we thinking the abortion issue is going to be a big issue? Because apparently President Joe Biden yesterday lashed out at Donald Trump saying that abortion, because Donald Trump yesterday said abortion should be left up to the states and warned of consequences should Trump win in November, because he said, meaning President Biden, no one trusts Donald Trump. And he pointed to how the former president made a political deal with the anti-abortion right and everything. So definitely, I'm just wondering, how much is this abortion issue going to play a role in the campaign and in the thoughts of the campaign?
There are abortion bans in 1/3 of American states, in 17 or 18 states. And like if you get pregnant in Florida now, you have to drive like 14 hours to Virginia to get an abortion. And this is, so yeah, but it's going to be a big deal. And U.S. elections are always close. I keep saying the last presidential election where one candidate got more than 53% of the vote was in 1988. Things are always close. So, if abortion moves people's vote totals by 2%, that's enough to determine a winner.
Hey, glad you joined us, Steve, and everything. We've been talking about the election and the notion of what's going on between Biden and Trump. But what is your take? You're out there in the streets. You're hearing from some of the candidates and all along those lines. So what is your take on how things are going in this way? And are you concerned about, as a Democrat, about which way things are going politically for the campaigns?
Hey guys, this is Steve Rao. I have to leave early. I'm in the city hall. We're about to start a meeting. But Mark, you were talking about what I'll say. I just wanted to update everybody that just came off the heels of an eclipse. We're going to talk about that on Thursday. Going to talk about Turkey restricting exports to Israel. And of course, the elephant in the room, Mark, you're talking about the abortion issue. Yes, I think it will affect this election, driving out independents, moderate Republicans, and Democrats. In North Carolina, where we sit, there actually isn't, they've limited it to 12 weeks. The lieutenant governor of North Carolina running as governor is claiming he wants to outlaw abortion in all cases, including incest. And so Attorney General Stein, sitting on $17 million of cash, will most likely be bringing this up as a major issue. I think that it's going to be interesting, and we'll see what happens with Israel, Ukraine, obviously. Just every day there's so much going on. But I do believe that CNN, the one thing I'll end you, and I've got to go into the meeting, I think they cover too much about Donald Trump, and I think that they're not covering about other issues about what Biden is doing with green economy, job creation. The key to the president is going to be able to convey to the American people that the economy is doing better. But that's hard to do when gas prices are up, housing prices are up, inflation is coming down, but that doesn't necessarily mean prices are coming down. We'll see what happens in North Carolina, and it's going to come down to 60,000 votes in 3 states to 4 states. So this is it. We're down. Conventions are in August, and election is in November.
I know you got to go to your meeting and everything, but one of the articles that I had read, and I'd love to hear everybody, including Rick's thoughts about this, is there is a notion that although they represent only 60% of the American electorate, that there is a lot of white rural rage out there. As a matter of fact, there is a couple of folks, Tom Scholler and Paul Wallman, who wrote a book on it called White Rural Rage, in which they are arguing that this rural whites are some of the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-gay geo-demographic group in the country, but they are also most conspiracist group, and oftentimes are, as I said before, white nationalists and white Christian nationalists, but they are saying that they are a very volatile group as well. So definitely, I just wondered our thoughts about this group, because even in North Carolina, there's a large portion of them that exist here, Virginia, and a number of other places. So I'm just wondering what our thoughts are around the rural vote, because they've definitely been in the forefront, not just here in North Carolina, but in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And definitely there are some people that are thinking that the left and the liberal side of the Democratic
Gotta go in the meeting, guys. Thank you.
paid enough attention to them. So I know he had to go to a meeting, but any thoughts on that from your perspective, Rick, and if you want to jump in?
I've got so you've got these rage guys who are also the conspiracy guys. Today, Putin, ISIS attacked Russia at this concert venue, killed 150 people, wounded hundreds, and Putin said they'd investigate. And today Putin said that it was Burisma, the Ukrainian oil company, where Hunter Biden used to be on the board, that paid for the ISIS attack, which is just the craziest bullshit you can possibly imagine. Yet, all these right-wing rage heads on Twitter were immediately like, okay, that makes sense. Aren't you guys mad at Hunter Biden yet? So Putin blamed Hunter Biden for an ISIS attack. And like the rage heads all just like bought it, like they were, they were lapped it up like Donald Trump is lactating. It's a problem. The rage, the propaganda, that this is we've got 7 months to go. I'd expect this level of insane propaganda with 1 month to go. So I don't know what kind of BS is going to come out of the propaganda factories, over the next few months, but it's going to be a lot. And all designed to get me crazy, to get the other side crazy, to get everybody pissed at each other.
Speaking of that, and along those same lines, go ahead, Sasha.
No, it looks exactly as Rick just said, and the level of idiocy to suggest that Ukrainian oil company is behind attack on this concert venue is beyond even conversation of for normal people. It should be just put in a garbage bin, right? Right away with the people who are discussing it. That's for sure.
Hey, Sasha, there are two groups. One that I know you are very much pro for, and another one that I have heard several times that you are not that pro for, that may be getting the membership in the UN, because apparently it'll come up, I think in the case of Ukraine, it'll come up after the war and everything. In the case of Palestine, it may come up in this month and everything. So the United Nations Security Council has said they will decide this month on the Palestinians' bid for full UN membership, along with a long shot campaign unlikely to survive U.S. opposition. But I just wonder you and Rick's thoughts about this notion of both possibly Palestine and Ukraine joining the UN at some point or another, because I had read that article earlier today that the UN, I think it's supposed to be the end of this month, may be looking at having Palestinian Authority. That would be who would be representing Palestine as a member.
Mark, a quick question. Are you suggesting that Ukraine will be accepted as a member of United Nations?
I've heard several reports that after the war that Ukraine may be accepted as a member of the United Nations.
NATO. I mean, Ukraine's already in the United Nations. We're talking about
Yeah, NATO, you're right, correct, NATO, my fault.
Okay, because the United Nations, Ukraine joined in, I believe, 1945, right?
Yeah, you are correct. That's my mistake. I was thinking NATO, but in the case of Palestine, it's the UN. So that was my fault. I will acknowledge.
Look, I think that NATO needs Ukraine much more than Ukraine needs NATO, because Ukraine will withstand Russian attacks with or without American help. Period. Full stop. Ukraine just does not need American help. If it comes, good, thank you. If it doesn't come, it will fight until the last Ukrainian soldier. Remember that. Now go to Major Taylor Green and Michael, what's his name, and Donald, what's his name, and all those other idiots, and just do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Ukraine just does not care what these idiots will decide to do. Now, European countries are completely different. They jumped up production of weapons. They're supplying enormous amount of financial help, weapons, advices. Finland, it's a seventh European country that signed bilateral agreement with Ukraine, because they all understand if Ukraine will fail, Russia will win, then there will be a real big war in Europe. And if you think that United States will hide behind Trump and Michael Johnson and other idiots and say, well, okay, it's a European war, we are not there. What about Article 5 of NATO? Or they say, okay, we don't care about Article 5, just attack each other, kill each other, we don't care. Well, you will see how you will care when all the South and North Korea and China and Iran, all of them will go after US. And what are you going to say? Oh, please help us. You NATO countries, you have to defend us. You have Article 5. When US, after 9/11, went to Afghanistan, US invoked Article 5 and asked European countries all to help US in its war against Afghanistan, later in Iraq, and so on. So this is a brilliant example of US foreign policy, which it has none. Full stop, period. Not like Trump.
Yeah, it's such a long
hold on. I mean, you asked about, let's do the Palestine part. I'm okay with recognizing Palestine in the UN, but who's going to govern Palestine? It's been 76 years since Israel became a nation. And in all that time, Gaza and the Palestinians haven't had not competent, non-corrupt leadership. You can't recognize an entity if you, like Hamas, in addition to wanting to kill Israelis and wipe Israel out, they steal billions of dollars in aid, and they don't even live in Gaza. They live in the fancy, the Burj Khalifa. They live in the fancy Arab states, well away from all the violence.
Well, I don't know enough about the gentleman, but apparently if it is recognized, because that's who is the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, I guess it would be this gentleman, Riyad Mansour, because that is who has been leading the charge and everything. And of course, he was speaking with, at one time with the media, with the Yemen's ambassador to the United Nations, which is Abdullah Ali Fadel al-Sadi, and the Algeria representative to the United Nations, which is Amar Benjama, and that was in New York. But my guess, because I've seen him on the news a couple of times, is that who would be the person that would be.
I don't know anything about that guy. What's his
I don't know anything about him either. Maybe we'll get him to come here on the Pod TV, and maybe he can talk about what he's got in mind for that part of the world. I do want to come back to Europe just really quickly, because this is for Sasha, because he's brought it up a couple of times, and all along those lines is how some of the Western nations are now increasing their amount of money and all in that space, because apparently with the Ukraine war and what Vladimir Putin has done with that horrible invasion and everything, there are countries that are nearby that are upping their money, because apparently in Norway it was never known as a very much of a military kind of powerhouse, but they have a new price tag of
let's clarify what it means by upping their money. When you belong to NATO, you don't really contribute to the NATO budget. What you do is you make a deal that says that you're going to spend at least 2% of your GDP, I believe, or your government budget on defense.
And that's apparently what Norway has done, because Norway has a new price tag of 152 million. So on this past Friday, they unveiled a 12-year, $56 billion defense boost that ranks as the country's most ambitious long-term commitment to its security in history. So it looks like they are going to put their money where their mouth is, and are going to put some money into securing their own defense, because the two-party government that runs the country is looking to spend a total of 152 million between now and 2036 on defense.
Because they're right up against Russia. Finland is right up against St. Petersburg, Russia, and Finland has what, 3 million people, maybe and Russia's got 160 million people. If Russia wants to take Finland, which would be crazy, because then the rest of Europe has to fight back, but still you want to be spending money on defense so you can hold off Russia long enough for the rest of NATO to step in and help you, so you're not Poland or Czechoslovakia in World War II.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And apparently they're going to spend some of their money on rocket engines, missiles, and artillery ammunition, because they're saying they're going to spend it on high explosives, because that would definitely be something they would need to defend themselves against a Russian invasion of some sort or another. But it does look like they're even going to be looking at some of their maritime abilities, because apparently they co-lead the maritime coalition with the UK, and they have announced that they're going to donate some F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. So they've also been doing some of the fighter pilot training in Denmark in that area. But definitely does look like some of these countries are trying to be more proactive. So definitely it does look like this is something to help both Ukraine, but also make sure that they are not invaded as well. Sasha, your thoughts around these countries beefing up their own defenses in case of a attack coming from their side of the Russian border as well? Because it definitely looks like this is a proactive action that should be praised and should definitely be continued. But your take?
Okay, my take is very simple. If Trump will be elected, God forbid, then all the structure of NATO and Article 5 and everything else is becoming garbage. So when Russia will see that it's done deal, then they can really start to conceptualize about attacking NATO countries, because without the US defense, including nuclear powers, there will be simply absence. So there will be NATO countries can fight Russians, that's for sure. But for Russia, it's becoming quite feasible undertaking. With US, it's not. So it all depends on which way election. So you understand now why Putin is championing Trump to become elected president, because that actually completely makes him hands-free to attack all NATO countries or some of the NATO countries or one country at a time. It doesn't matter, because without umbrella of U.S. nuclear shield, Russia is free to do anything. That's actually what Trump said just a couple of weeks ago, that if somebody will not pay its 2%, then he's not going to defend that country. And then Russia is free to do anything, whatever they want to do with this country. And remember that John Bolton, in his memoirs, he said that if Trump would be elected president, there would be no NATO by now, if he would be elected in 2020. Same thing happened in 2024. If he will be elected, that will be the end of NATO, because that's what Putin wants him to do.
So, I mean, but Putin has a number of countries to choose from, because I think Russia is second to Canada in land area. Is that right, Sasha?
Yes, correct.
And so, like, maybe...
No, sorry. Canada is second. Russia is by far the biggest country.
Okay, so which means that it borders on a ton of countries. And like, you got Belarus that already has a government that is friendly to Moscow.
Absolutely. It's completely controlled by Moscow.
Yeah, you've got Latvia, you got Estonia, Finland.
There is a difference, because the Baltic countries are members of NATO. So if NATO is still there and it functions, he will not touch any of these Baltic countries. However, if Trump will be in power, then of course he will take Baltic countries quite easily.
But to the south, you got Georgia, you got Azerbaijan, you've got Kazakhstan. Nobody even knows what Kazakhstan is, and like, who's going to stop? I mean, it's big. It's a huge, I don't know. I just feel like there are lots of opportunities for,
although Kazakhstan is not an easy case for Putin, because China is doing a lot of business in Kazakhstan, and China actually offered its umbrella in case of some uncertain situation that it would defend. Now, Azerbaijan, which is a fairly big country by population at least, this has a very strong alliance with Turkey. Because they're all the Turkish-speaking countries, they even can understand each other, and they're Muslim countries. And also remember that the great adversary of Turkey in that region is Iran. And Azerbaijan is very much anti-Iranian country. And with Turkey, I don't think that Putin will hurry up to attack them, because what's in it for him? He cannot defeat Ukraine, and what he needs, another war on the south? No, he's not going to do it. The Baltic states, if NATO will collapse, the Baltic states is a real possibility. There are 3 small countries with a population. Estonia is slightly over 1 million, Latvia maybe 2.5 million people, and what else? Lithuania, probably 3 million people. That's about it.
What about Moldova? Aren't they kind of friendly with Putin?
Not really, but if he will take Ukraine, he will take Moldova very easily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because Moldova is like Ukraine's appendix.
Your question for both of you, based on something that Nick talks about all the time, because I've been thinking about this, and I was actually saw an article, I was looking it up and everything. Aren't there, because I know Nick keeps talking about wanting to move to Spain, and maybe Spain is a wonderful place to move to. I know you had a wonderful trip to Aruba, Sasha, and everything. But when I look up the European countries, some of these countries are almost in as much debt and debt trouble as the United States. I want to say that Greece and maybe even Portugal and a number of these other countries have got their own issues with debt and everything in that space. So are we the only one that has got this problem of overwhelming debt, or am I correct in thinking that there are a number of countries around the world that are facing these debt crises and all along this line? So maybe whether it's Nick or whether somebody else moves to these countries, they might find themselves in almost a similar type of situation, because I'm thinking a number of these countries are having some serious financial problems themselves. But correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't understand, Mark. Let's see, the U.S. debt is now around what, $35 trillion?
Mhm.
Okay, how does it affect you if the debt would be instead of 35, $25 trillion, or on the other hand, $45 trillion? How would it affect you, Mark?
Well, I mean, the general feeling that people say about the debt being so high is that it impacts the cost of living, whether that's your grocery prices, your gas
How,
prices, or
what,
the housing
how,
prices.
how grocery prices depend on the debt? You tell me when you're buying groceries. So if the debt is going lower, the prices for groceries will go lower or higher and higher on both ways or on both ends. How can you explain
Well,
that?
supposedly, if you balance the budget, and like I said, this is for those that are more into economics than I am, but if you balance the budget, then it is supposed to drive prices down. I mean, we saw that to some
But
degree with
no,
the
okay, that
food
doesn't
prices.
happen. Prices go up, they don't go down. It's
Right,
called greedflation.
right.
It's where companies see everybody blaming the government or the supply chain for inflation, and they're like, we can use this as cover to shrink our boxes and raise our prices and increase our profit margins. So, you know, yeah, you could drop the national debt and prices would it would anytime a price would drop for like cereal or candy bars, it would be a publicity stunt. And but most of the time, prices are not going to go back down.
Rick,
Greece used
Rick, just an example. Okay, take Costco, the company Costco. They
Mhm.
are a public company. They're operating for profit. They have suppliers of all kinds of foods, including their own brands or so on. Now, how the debt, whether it's 35 million or 25 or 45, how does it affect their relationship with suppliers? Suppliers will try to sell at the highest possible price as long as it's feasible, because if they're too greedy or so on, the Costco will find other suppliers for sure. So they will try to jack and get whatever best price they can. Costco, on the other hand, will press for much lower prices with the same suppliers because they will sell to customers still at the highest possible price, so their margin will be bigger. So it has nothing to do with US debt.
No, but hold on a second. But Sasha, the flip side of that is there is a very popular restaurant. I think they're in the West Coast where Rick is. I know they're here in the East Coast called Compare. Compare is very much of a Latin American grocery store, and there's a couple of other ones that are Asian backed and all along those lines. But I imagine that if there is turmoil in those Latin American countries, which there is turmoil in some of those countries, that it impacts the cost of getting the food from those places and all along those lines. Because if you are a Compare gets a lot of food from Mexico, Venezuela, and a number of other Latin American countries. So if those countries are in a crisis, then that cost would be greater than it would be if the supply chain is less interrupted. Am I correct in
What
thinking that, Rick?
what it has to
it,
do
it, it
debt?
doesn't.
This is what I don't understand. Okay, they have turmoil in Venezuela and probably in I don't know, in Tajikistan or in North Korea or in Australia. What it has to do with U.S. debt? This is what.
But it impacts the cost, and the cost has
All
to do
right,
with the
so
debt.
the grocery business is a tough business. The
Right.
average profit margin for a supermarket chain is 2%.
Right.
Lately, they've been able to hide behind inflation, jack up their prices, and raise their profit margin to 3%. Who can blame them?
I mean, but Rick, along those same lines, one of the biggest tricks, and some people would say that it is a good trick, some people would say it's a bad trick, is that if you remember, and I'm just going to date myself and everything, remember when you used to get a full bag of potato chips and it used to be full of nothing but potato chips, and now it's about maybe 35 to 40% air because they are trying to find a way to cut costs and to save money. So it's not as much of a deal as it used to be. I'll just
all right.
My question is exactly still the same. What U.S. debt has with this bag of potato chips? Anybody explain it to me.
Well, so before COVID, my wife and I had a price point when we go out to dinner maybe twice a week on the weekend. Our price point was $30. Where can we go get a dinner for two for $30? That sounds crazy today because today our price point is where can we go to get dinner for two for close to $50.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the inflation, has happened. but reducing the debt won't help. Now, you asked about Greece and Spain. Greece used to be in trouble. Greece used to have 50% unemployment. Greece had like nobody paid their fair share of taxes in Greece. It was they had a massive, they had no tax revenue because everybody cheated on their taxes. Then I think they belong to the European Union. I think the European Union stepped in and said, Greece, you've got to get your crap together. And I guess it's a little better now in Greece. But it doesn't matter because for Nick moving to Spain or Greece, because like for our 30th anniversary, my wife and I went to Italy, and Italy's like one of the just most fun, delightful countries in the freaking world. And you think things should cost a ton because, you know, they got 2,000 years of history. They're the, you know, kind of the cradle of civilization. But no, you can walk into a restaurant in Italy, you can get dinner for like the equivalent of $12 because it's still just a country where things are pretty cheap. I would think ditto for Spain, you know, dinner and drinks.
But along those same lines, and we only got a few more minutes to go and everything. One of the things that I heard even growing up was that a number of people, and yes, I do have some family members that were what some people might consider radicals and everything along those lines, but there was this notion of what people call multinational corporations, which are corporations that might be based in the United States or Europe and exploit other parts of the world. So if that is the case, then that can drive up debt, drive up prices, and a number of other things. So that is a conversation that was existing even as far back in the 60s when my dad was very much involved in the civil rights struggle and all along those lines. So there's this notion that the big corporations, and we talked about it even earlier, I think it was earlier today that you mentioned what the farm situation was, because a lot of the farms are now doing what multinational corporations used to do worldwide. So they are buying up the small farmers, and that's why there's not many small farmers out there, because there's now these big corporations that are running the farm situation.
Because
multinational corporations ran the economy of the world.
Because Walmart says we're not going to buy meat from you unless we get it from you at X number of cents per pound. Right. That drives small ranchers out of business because it takes factory farming to deliver at that scale. What the more than the debt, what's going to change prices and mostly drive them down is AI and increasingly higher tech. 100 years ago, food cost a quarter of a family's income. Clothing cost a quarter of a family's income. But then we learned how to mechanize food and clothing manufacture, and now food is cheap, clothing is cheap. AI will make a ton of stuff cheaper, regardless of the debt.
But Rick, isn't part of the problem with that is that AI, if it is good AI, and if it's the kind that we're talking about, that we could get into that kind of lifestyle of soying and green, which I don't want to be eating.
Yeah, okay, so
green was all about and everything.
Weird.
But
things are
going to
get
weird and everything. But I'm also saying that the food could be very plastic, because that's what people are complaining about now.
It'll be delicious. It'll be delicious. Well, it'll be like Star Trek.
You get a lot of that food.
On Star Trek, they have like food printers that print it, but nobody complains about the food on Star Trek. I don't think. I think they love it. It tastes great. It'll be the same here when we get, you know, food that's printed out. You know, at first, yeah, it'll be crappy. Then it'll get better, and it'll be cheaper, and it'll be better for us because it'll be entirely engineered, and it'll be weird, but it will taste great.
Well, I could be wrong, and like I said, we've only got a few more minutes, but if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sasha, but I think that Sasha likes a good kind of vodka and a good drink and all along those lines. I know that he's definitely a fan of certain good meats, whether that's a good steak. I think I've heard you talk about a good steak and all along those lines and everything. So I'm thinking that Sasha does not want a fake steak. He wants real steak, and you want real vodka. You're not wanting a faux version or a fake version, even if it tastes really good. What's your thought?
Vodka is almost pure alcohol. It's refined from potatoes. The mark of a good vodka is it being tasteless. At my former job, we did a taste test. Could you tell the difference between a fancy ass vodka and a cheap ass vodka. And pretty much no, there's very little difference in vodka, which is our cleanest alcohol. If you want to drink without getting caught, this is what F. Scott Fitzgerald, an alcoholic, did. He sat there with a pitcher of water because people were watching him because alcohol was killing him. So he had his pitcher of water. It was vodka. And, he was able to safely drink himself to death. So, and
Sasha wants the real thing. I could be wrong. Sasha, you want the real vodka. You don't want the fake version. You want the real top
You're
quality.
absolutely right. But tell me one more time what it has to do with U.S. debt. I really don't understand that. Inflation is a different story. Interest rates is a different story. And interest rates, if they will go down, they will definitely be very positive because the payments of the interest on the debt will go lower. So that will be very helpful. Other than that, what can you do with U.S. debt? Every year it will go higher and higher because of the expenditures, because of new budget, and so on. You're talking about sometimes on a balancing budget and what a genius Clinton was or so on. Forget, these times are gone. There will never be a balanced budget in the United States. The debt will go higher and higher and higher. But so is production of the United States is going higher. The companies generating huge profits. So you have to live with it. So there will be, people who are suffering, who has nothing to do with great US companies. They're not shareholders. They're not working in these companies or so on. So they all will be losers. And then there's the companies themselves that will they're already greatest in the world. They will become even greater, and they will buy all the other viable companies here and there, and so on. This is a process. You cannot stop it. And U.S. debt, because it has to now take care of the people who are not part of the great American companies, who are not shareholders, who are not working there, or so on, and their children, and so on. So U.S. debt will grow. Just accept it. Stop fighting.
Hold on. There's one more thing in the news I want to talk about, which is Biden is trying again to get rid of student debt to offer some relief to 30 million Americans. And, the Republicans are saying, well, that's not fair. What about plumbers who don't have student debt? But the deal is that if we have an educated population that is able to maintain technology to help America keep building better and better technology, we will sell a bunch of, we will continue to have economic growth, which means that if you can get the corporations to pay their fair share of taxes or even half their fair share, that increased revenue can reduce debt. We want to continue to embrace high technology. We want to continue to get Americans educated in STEM fields, in coding, and so that we can ride the wave of technology so the U.S. can make a ton of money. Now, we had an unfair advantage in the 1940s. The rest of the Western world was in ruins, and the U.S. had half of the world's manufacturing capacity because everything else had been blown up and burned down. And we'll never be that spoiled again. But if we continue to educate our people and build industry, then we can continue to make a bunch of money and have a country that functions.
But just along those lines, to get ready to wrap up and everything, there is a number of people that will argue, because even in North Carolina, there was a push to have some vocational training. So definitely there are some people that are getting some breaks even in vocational training, because we don't have enough good, solid plumbers and bricklayers and some of those in the vocational fields. And some of our schools have gotten away from that and all along those lines. And even to what you were saying, Sasha, I'm trying to reach out to some economists that can answer that question better than I can and everything. So hopefully they'll have an answer for you as to why it is important, because I know I didn't give a good answer, but we will try to find an answer from them. I do remember that whole conversation about trickle-down economics, which is this notion that what happens good for the rich is supposed to come down and help the poor as well. And we know that didn't work all that effectively either. But I'm going to reach out to some economists, and hopefully they'll be either on World Politics or World Edition. But right now, we're going to get out of here. We've got a couple of
One more thing. The U.S. makes stuff. Russia, our biggest enemy right now, doesn't make stuff. They have a terrible economy.
Nothing.
And all they have is screwing with Western countries. That's all they've got.
All Russia has is crime, prostitution, and there's nothing positive. It used to be in Soviet times as a ballet, or there was some classical music maybe or something else. Today, it's all down to zero. It's only weapons they're selling. But even weapons they cannot sell anymore because of the war with Russia, with Ukraine. Sorry, it shows that Russia is not good at.
Russia is only exporting 20% as many weapons as they used to export
Absolutely.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we get ready to get on out of here. It was a great conversation with the two of you. We'll have some other people join us on Thursday. And of course, we got World Edition on tomorrow. I know we got a guest on the 11th. I think it'll just be the regular crew on tomorrow on Wednesday. But right now, we're ready to get on out of here. And it's been another fun conversation with both you, Sasha, and you, Rick, as well. So we'll
Thank
get
you.
ready to get out of
Bye.
here. No problem.